Hey everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview and review, I'm taking a look at Miracle at Dunkirk, the British withdrawal from France, May to June 1940. Designed by Hermann Luttmann, with additional development by Don Herndon, this game was published by Legion Wargames. This is an updated version of the original release from 2014, A Spoiled Victory. Miracle at Dunkirk is a solitaire wargame that places you in command of the Allied forces at Dunkirk in late spring of 1940. You manage both the soldiers in the Dunkirk perimeter, holding back the encroaching German forces, and the evacuation itself. The game system, including the Germans, is run by 4 decks of cards. Speaking of cards, each turn sequence of play is actually random thanks to the turn order card system. Ultimately, you will have 8 turns from May 28th to June 4th to evacuate as many men as possible. Let's do a quick overview. I do have a tutorial playthrough of the first turn for an in-depth look at the game. I'll cover my pros and cons, and as usual, give you my final thoughts. All right, let's get on the table. All right, let's take a look at the map, the units, the cards, combat, victory conditions, and end with game length. Right now I have the map set up, you could probably call it a early mid game, so it is not the very beginning setup. In Miracle at Dunkirk, as I talked about in the introduction, your goal is to evacuate as many evacuees as you can from the shores of France to Dover in England. You're going to be doing that over a series of 8 turns from May 28th to June 4th. And each turn, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be drawing from this deck of turn order cards. Before we deep dive into this, I will explain the map. But what you're going to be doing is there are 17 cards. They get shuffled each turn, and each of these cards is going to be a different phase or operation that you or the German AI is conducting that turn. Therefore, every turn you play, you never know exactly when or in what order the phases are going to occur. So looking at the map here, let's go ahead and just kind of center right here in the bottom right. You can see East Dunkirk and West Dunkirk, right? Out here you have the mole. If you know historically, that was a concrete and wooden, I believe it was breakwater, that was used heavily during the evacuations of the troops from Dunkirk and Dunkirk beaches. And then heading what would be east, because remember, this is north, that's south. So heading east out of Dunkirk, you have different beaches. Right now I have different evacuee units there. Now if you look at the outside of the map, in the actual play area here, you can see all these different areas or nodes. They are lettered from A down to R. The Germans are going to have a single unit that follows these white tracks going from node to node, attacking and moving in. You will be defending, maneuvering, holding them off. You can maneuver from area to area, not just from along a single track. But your overwhelmed forces definitely do not have the same combat strength as the Germans, and they'll be continuously pushing, being activated, and moving towards you. As you retreat and tighten the perimeter, at some point you're going to have to begin moving combat units to East Dunkirk and the beaches to convert them into evacuees. The combat units, very standard. I'll have a couple graphics pop up during this, as I usually do. You're going to have your combat strength, you're going to have a defense number, and then depending on the type of unit, if it's infantry, mechanized, or panzers, it's going to have additional different movements. Besides the land area where the German forces are moving in and your forces are defending, and besides the beaches or involving the beaches down here, you have the sea spaces. The sea spaces are where you are going to use your naval units to actually evacuate and move your evacuees to Dover. That is how you get victory points. Each of the evacuees has a number on them. Once they're loaded up on ships, and I'm not going to go into the exact process, I will describe it a little bit when I cover the naval phase of the game and the evacuation phase of the game. But basically, they're going to get loaded onto the ships. The ships are going to go back to Dover and then come back and try to pick up more. In the meantime, they're possibly going to be facing E-boat, U-boat, and German artillery attacks, along with Luftwaffe attacks. Now let's go ahead and look at the cards, the turn order cards. I'll cover each of the phases, describe them quickly, and then we'll go ahead and move on. All right, so first one, and I just have a couple of them chosen. First one would see you would draw and say, okay, look, I have the British Second Corps Ground Operations card. You will now conduct a ground operations phase. British Second Corps are any of your British units, which are the tan units, that have the orange stripe at the top. They also clearly have a nice little 2 there, just to remind you. You are then going to be able to conduct combat, movement, build entrenchments, or maybe move down to the hospital to heal up, like this unit's trying to do, etc. You have a couple different things you can do. The point is, though, is you're going to definitely, early in the game, be wanting to hold the Germans back, and then a little bit later in the game, you're still going to want to hold the Germans back, but you have to start moving units back along the beaches here to convert them into evacuees. All right, so you finish up that operation, you go to another card. Oh, what do you know? Naval operations. First off, you're going to advance the day-night marker, which I'll cover that in a second at the very end here. Naval operations is when you are moving your ships. So those are going to be your large ships, your little ships, destroyers, minesweepers, etc. Generally, everybody starts in Dover, and that includes each turn you're going to get additional naval units, right? Remember, historically, they were marshaling more and more forces over time. You're going to be starting in Dover, taking one of the routes as long as it's open. Route X was the shortest route, but it did begin the evacuation close due to the presence of mines. Possibly suffering artillery attacks from German U-boats and E-boats. You're going to be moving along. You're going to go ahead and move into either shallow spaces or next to the mole here. And you're going to be taking those evacuees on and then go ahead and moving them back. There's not going to be combat, naval combat per se, as in surface ships fighting each other. But you're going to have some interactions with channel attack cards when you are attacked by the different forces that I just talked about. All right, on to the next phase. And again, these would be random, so you wouldn't know exactly what would happen. Let's talk about the evacuation operation phase. So this is where you're getting those evacuees. So during the evacuation operations phase, you can do things like create evacuees. Again, early, you get to draw them from a cup. Later on, you're converting combat units into them. You can rally them if they are disrupted, but then you can build the jetties out here. You can repair them or the mole. But the very core of the game is going to be moving them either into the shallows and then onto a large ship, or if you're, say, at the mole at East Dunkirk, you can move directly onto the large ships. By the way, the ships, each one is different, but the number of evacuees they can hold is in that top right, that number right there. So say 2 for this old destroyers unit, 3 for this random large ships unit. That's how many they can hold. So not VP number, but the actual number of counters. And then again, once you have your evacuees, you have them created, you get them on their ships. During the naval operations phase is when they are moved back to Dover. Okay, on to the next phase. Wehrmacht activation. So now the Germans are controlled by the cards. So in this case, you would draw a German activation card. It's going to have Luftwaffe at the top. It's going to have Wehrmacht at the bottom. It's going to tell you what and where to activate. So for instance, on this card, 2 random right flank tracks. The right flank, German right flank, helpfully listed, is from here over. So from M down to R, which is 6 of them, which you would go ahead and roll a D6 and roll for 2 tracks. You go ahead and roll again, see which track or tracks, because the same track can activate twice, is going to activate. When they activate, generally speaking, pretty simple. They're going to move towards you. They're going to follow their white line, encounter your units. You're going to have combat. They may break through, depends if it's day or night. And then eventually they're going to be pushing their way towards you. All right. And then next card, Luftwaffe attacks. So now the German Air Force is going to be attacking you. How you do that? Simple. German activation card, flip it over. First, you're going to check for a sorties modifier. That's just going to modify the initial sorties amount. Consider that the amount of dice you roll, which I'll cover combat in just a second. Consider the amount of dice you roll. You then discard that card, you draw another one, and then see where they will actually attack. In this case, attack location, strafe the beaches. Luftwaffe, now let's see that See that Stuka there? Oh, terrible. That Stuka is going to come in and he's going to bomb all these beaches. Each of these areas, each of these nodes containing your units, you're going to be rolling against them depending on whatever their defense number is, depends on the terrain or type of unit. For air attacks, generally speaking, it's the terrain. Whether they open in a beach or are they in town, it's going to make a big difference. You're going to be rolling the amount of dice that's listed for sorties, trying to get that defense number or excuse me, greater than that defense number to get successes. All right, and then I believe that's finally for him. Yep, finally you have events. So there will be random events. You draw this card. You're going to go ahead and draw from the random event deck. It's going to tell you something like, oh, German right flank probe. All German units on the right flank, again, tracks M through R. Move one node. Any combats caused will halt after one round regardless of result. No breakthroughs. So they're going to move up. They're going to tighten up the lines. If you're not there, they're going to go ahead and just move up one. If you are, they're still going to move. They're going to conduct a combat. There's just not going to be that follow-up breakthrough like a full activation could possibly have. All right, talk about combat quick, and then we'll wrap up the overview. So with combat, very simple. I did mention already kind of rolling dice. You're rolling dice whatever the attack factor is. So you have a whole bunch of D6s. You're going to be rolling them. You're going to be rolling against the defense number, whether it is the unit, a unit with additional support, it is entrenched, it's behind a river. It's a war game, right? There's always going to be modifiers. There's, generally speaking, wherever you are, there's a number that when you're defending against a Luftwaffe attack, if you're attacked by ground, you're going to have a modifier. If you want to see the full thing in action, go check out my playthrough video. I do, I think, a decent job anyway of running through a couple combats and really explaining it well. So you're going to be having a bunch of dice rolled, primarily by the Germans, although you can definitely conduct your own attacks if you feel you're in an advantageous position. Rolling those dice, checking those numbers. For example, say you're attacking him, and say he just had the 3, and you have 4 dice you're rolling. You want 4 of their hires. Holy cow, that's 4 successes. You go ahead and check the chart for, say this was a German ground attack. 4 successes is an overrun. You apply the successes. Every success gets applied to units, making them disrupted or causing retreats or flipping them over, right, to their reduced side or to their battle-worn side, reducing the counter to the next counter, if that's an option. For the French units, it's not. And then after that, you go ahead and just see what happens, again, with the Germans, whether if it was a ground or they break through anything like that. The rules will cover all that in depth. Whew. Okay, victory conditions. You need to evacuate your men. You add up the victory points. This is where I will show the game player aid that you'll be using. So you are adding up your victory points. Get as many as possible. You know, every time you evacuate, whatever units, whatever evacuee counters are on a ship, that number is going to be that many VPs. So you get them back to Dover. You may get 4 at a time. You know, 4 VPs, 1 ship. Another ship could have 12. Another ship could have 1. Obviously, I would hope to try to have more on each of your ships, but that is what you were trying to do. Move evacuees to Dover and add up your victory points here. There is a chart in the rulebook that's going to tell you the historical result was a miracle. Try to get that if you can. It's going to be difficult, but I'm not going to say it's impossible. All right, so looking at this, kind of wrapping it up here, looking at the play raid. These are the game turns, like I mentioned before, turns 1 through 8, May 28th through June 4th. Luftwaffe sorties, remember that is basically going to be the number of dice that you're rolling when there's a Luftwaffe attack. RAF sorties, you're going to get to roll this against the Luftwaffe sorties to try to reduce that number slightly before the attacks are carried out. Just to show that the RAF did mount some anti-fighter, anti-bomber air cover as much as they could anyway. There wasn't a ton of it, but there was some. Evacuation actions. Remember I mentioned moving evacuees, creating evacuees. You only have so many in a turn. Generally speaking, it starts at 2, but it can be changed with different abilities, different events, and different actions. Your victory points box, a marker holding box here, day and night. So depending on day or night, that can reduce or help you reducing, say, the Luftwaffe sorties or German movement. It does affect you as well in for your movement. However, you do get an additional evacuation operation during a night. So nights were where the majority of the evacuations were carried out, just because it was that much harder for the Luftwaffe and the German Navy to attack the Allied ships. Work your way through your turns, evacuate as many as you can, and try to get that very rare and hard to get miracle rating. Game length, my first game took about 7 hours, so it's not short. Now, I'd say by the last game I played, and I played probably, I don't know, I think 4 full games, and then maybe half of a learning game. So I played a decent amount. I think I got it down to 4 hours. So it's not a short game at all. So just keep in mind, first game, learning game, call it 7-ish. Later on, 4. I'm probably a slow player compared to some people, probably as low as 3 for other people, 3 hours. So keep in mind, you are playing through 8 turns, and you're going through 17 different phases, so there's going to be an amount of time that you can play. It's going to take just basically a minimum amount of time, right? You can't really rush through it. Hopefully that explained everything. I know I didn't go deep in depth. Again, the core of the game, right? Starts off the Germans in the perimeter. They are threatening you, pushing you in. You're trying to hold them back. You're not going to be super successful unless you're really lucky. In the meantime, as they're encroaching on the ground, you are creating evacuees. You are moving them onto ships. You're getting your ships over there, and you are moving them out of here. In the meantime, you're getting attacked by the Luftwaffe. They're going to be strafing your units on the beach, attacking your units in towns. They're going to be attacking your ships. Your ships are going to be getting attacked by German artillery, E-boats, U-boats, mines. There's going to be minefields that pop up. Random events are going to occur. There are all kinds of things that are going to happen, and they will happen, but that is the core of the game. Okay, that's it for my overview, and that was plenty enough. Again, go watch my tutorial playthrough of the first turn for a really in-depth look at it. Let's go ahead and talk about pros and cons. As always, cons first. Okay, my first issue is that there's one part of the game that, while small, I just don't feel right about historically. And that is the mole. I mentioned this before in the overview, but the mole, if you don't know, was about a half-mile long concrete and wood breakwater. Historically, the mole was part of the Dunkirk harbor and was also the primary method that soldiers were evacuated. Now, it was repeatedly bombed by the Luftwaffe dozens, if not maybe hundreds of times. Yet every single time it was quickly rebuilt and was used throughout the entire 8-day evacuation. Unfortunately, in this game, unlike historically, it can be bombed and destroyed. And once it's destroyed, it can't be rebuilt. Even worse, I found during my plays that it was bombed often. There's just a lot of attacks in the Luftwaffe deck, or in the deck of German activation, that has their bombings on the beaches and in the harbor, and specifically the mole, right? It is historically, as it was, and it will be in the game, a target. It's not ahistorical, the fact that it was being bombed, that it will be bombed frequently, but the fact that it can be knocked out permanently is. Simply put, in my opinion, the mole should not be able to be destroyed, just damaged. That will force you to expend your precious evacuation actions rebuilding the mole from time to time, because remember, rebuilding jetties is part of the evacuation operation. Of course, a simple house rule, only allowing it to be damaged could be used. But at this point, you guys know when I review my games, I base my reviews on the rules as written, not with any house rules in mind. My second con is I do worry about replayability. Now, the game does have a wonderful, random turn order system that I talked about in the overview with these cards. And that helps each turn play out differently. And it does, have a strong effect on your strategy and tactics, right? What you can do and what you had planned to have done. But at the end of the day, right, there's only one scenario. There's only one situation. You defend the Dunkirk perimeter while the Germans tighten the noose, and you are attempting to evacuate as many evacuees as possible from these beaches and from the harbor. That's the game. And that's every game. The replayability, it's going to have to come from your end. Trying different strategies, like one game, holding the Germans as far from Dunkirk as possible. And another game, pulling in your soldiers and forming a tighter perimeter on more defensible terrain, say on the rivers and the canals. Another game, you might focus on filling every naval ship with evacuees to the max before leaving the harbor and beaches. Another game, maybe you're sending the ships, you're grabbing a couple troops, and then you go ahead and move them back. You get the idea. Finally, I do want to mention the component issue. The primary counter sheet containing the combat units was printed backwards. What that means is the front of The counter is actually the back. Because the counter sheet has an older die cut style, that does mean the front sides of the combat units have an indentation. For example, looking at this unit right here, if you look at it, you can kind of see there is the indented side. There's some indentations in there. Yep, you can kind of see it right there. And then you see sort of the smoother side, right? So this would have been the front of the sheet when it was die cut, when it was pressed. That's actually the back of the first counter. This is the front. So when the units go out, they're going to be on this side to begin. This has zero effect on gameplay. Let's be clear, right? Zero effect. But it is unfortunate. And it may bother some people, so I want to be upfront about it. Okay, that's it for the cons. On to the pros. First off, and it's sad how rare this is in the world of wargaming, the rulebook for Miracle at Dunkirk is a gem. It's well written, easy to reference, and I only needed to go on Board Game Geek to clarify, I think, 2 separate rules, and one of those was really pretty much more on me just not being sure. I also love the player aids. I'm not going to flash them up here. I'm not going to grab myself and set up, but basically there are 2 player aids. Each one is a 3-panel fold-out. So that's, they are large because that's 6 panels total. So it could either require a lot of flipping, or I have everything set up basically up there at this top of my table, and I have them sitting up so I can see everything. I can see everything I need at a glance. The game system itself is also, although it's very procedural and there's many steps and operations, it's on the lighter side of like a medium complexity. So after just a couple of turns really into my first game, I was playing without referencing this rulebook 95% of the time. I found that the player aids just did such a good job of providing everything I needed to do, or most of the things I needed to know to play from turn to turn. Second, I really like the look of the game. I think it's very attractive on the table. The cards are the weakest component-wise, right? They're very standard. They're poker size, but they're not a linen finish or anything like that. They're just a very standard. But, they are serviceable. And the map and the counters more than make up for it. The theme is also strong with the game, thanks to the map, the counters, the cards, and every subsystem within the game makes sense, from day-night modifiers, evacuation actions, moving evacuees onto ships, to converting combat units into evacuees during the late game. Third, you feel like you have a lot of choices every turn, and you do. You have total freedom with your combat units without having to worry about things like supply lines, right? It just wasn't impactful during that amount of time. You can try different strategies with your naval units, how and when you create and move your evacuees. Also, I didn't mention this earlier, but the GHQ, or General Headquarters Unit, as long as it's on the map, gives you a choice of 3 different powerful actions to take every turn, which includes things like drawing replacement German activation cards, increasing evacuation actions, or whatever turn order card was drawn, moving to the bottom of the draw pile. So you have to play it, but it does get moved to the pile, bottom of the pile. So it comes at the very end of the turn. That's a pretty powerful ability to have as long as this unit survives, and to have that ability every single turn in the game. Fourth, speaking of the evacuation system, I really like how it works. It did appear complex when I first read the rules, but after playing, I'm relieved to tell you it's intuitive. Evacuees are generated on the beach or harbor, right? Whether it's from a combat unit that moves there or drawing from the cup early. Then you move them onto either shallow space, or you embark them directly onto ships, and finally you move those ships back to Dover and disembark the units, disembark the evacuees, and then count up the VPs. The evacuation does start slow, but it picks up speed as you play, which fits historically. Fifth, because the rulebook is so well written and the player aids are helpful, the game is easy to play. It's not a short game like I mentioned before, but you can knock out a turn in, call it 30 minutes, maybe less, maybe a little more. Once you're comfortable with the system, it just flows. The game, it's also easy if you have the space and the ability to leave set up and walk away and then come back to later. Draw a card, you flip it, resolve whatever that operation, say you resolve a naval operation, you resolve a German activation, discard the card, and then you can walk away. And when you come back again, you just draw another card, flip it over, and go ahead and go from there. Finally, with every wargame I play, I expect to be able to come close to replicating history. Miracle at Dunkirk does an excellent job of that. It's not easy to replicate the miracle of Dunkirk, by the way, but it is possible, and that's really all I ask. Okay, that's it for my pros and cons. Let's end with my final thoughts. Miracle at Dunkirk is one of those rare delayed games that was not only worth the wait, it actually exceeded my expectations. Hermann Luttmann designed the core of the game back in 2014, and this reimagined version, with help from some additional developers, has been fine-tuned to near perfection. I did say near perfection because it's not perfect. A couple issues to watch for are the misprinted counters, because I know some people will be put off by that, and which is fair. The game length can feel a bit long for a solitaire game in my opinion. My first learning game, like I mentioned before, took over 6 hours, maybe 7 hours. Then even when I felt comfortable, games are still taking 3 or 4 hours. And replayability could be an issue in the long run. This isn't a game with multiple scenarios or what-if style rules or setups. There's one setup and one goal for every game. Those possible issues aside, again, depends on who you are, and all of them are going to apply to every person watching this. What a wonderful gaming experience. Some people may wonder, is it worth purchasing this version if you already have a spoiled victory? Their answer is almost surely yes. Miracle at Dunkirk has higher quality components, more attractive art, a true naval component, and the ground and air aspects have been expanded. It's not labeled as such, but I'd consider it a true deluxe version. I can easily recommend Miracle at Dunkirk to anyone who wants to see an updated game done right, who wants to feel like they were part of something that was truly a miracle during those dark early days of World War II. At the end of my reviews, I like to offer a reading recommendation. A book on this topic I enjoyed is titled, fittingly enough, The Miracle of Dunkirk, written by Walter Lord. The author does a tremendous job, and I mean that. This is one of the better history books I've ever read. Just does a tremendous job, detailing sort of the beginning of the war in a broad overview, and then the lead up to what happened, why Dunkirk happened, why there was the perimeter, less from the German side, much, much more from the Allied side, but that's also the side you're playing in this game, right? And then guiding us through the evacuation, the importance of the mole, the importance of the naval units from the big, government ships to the little ships that came over and helped. He covers everything, and I was reading that, playing this, and they just went hand in hand. So I absolutely recommend this book to anyone who's interested in this game. All right, thank you to everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. Please let me know what you think of my video and this game in the comments below. And until next time, everyone, later.